In this video, we're going to get familiar with what we can do inside of Mocha within Boris Effects' Continuum. And there are essentially two ways that we can leverage it. One is by using Mocha masking, and that is taking any of our Continuum effects and limiting them to a specific region of the frame by using Mocha masks as well as tracking. The other is Mocha parameter tracking. There are certain effects like lens flares and textures that you might want to have tracked to a specific source in your image. For instance, lens flares to have it tracked to the light source when there is a moving camera through your scene. This can easily be accomplished with Mocha. We're going to take a look at this and more in this lesson, so follow along by opening up the Video 6 exercises bin and the Mocha masking sequence. Give that a double click. Let's go into our effects panel. I'd like you to find the BCC plus black and white effect, which will apply to the clip in the Mocha masking sequence. We'll head to effect controls and just make a few parameter changes. I want to change this filter type to blue. We're going to brighten this image a bit. I'll add a contrast value of 40, and let's set the gamma to -8. So we get a bit of a stylistic look. We would like, though, to limit this to everywhere in the image except the subject's eyes. And that's where Mocha masking comes in. So at the top of every BCC plus effect is Mocha mask option that we simply just click. Mocha starts, and now we are ready to add our masks to this image. Now, we can create masks using the toolbar at the top here in our Essential workspace. And one classic tool that's used quite a bit is the X-spline tool. So let's select that, and noticing what frame you're on by this little indicator here at the bottom of the timeline, that's where we're going to be creating the mask. I am currently on frame 16, and here I'm going to press the Z key temporarily just to zoom in onto the right eye. I'm going to click to make a point and then start to draw around the edges of this eye. Once you get back to the first point, double click it, and that's just going to close out the shape. We can still continue to make changes to individual points. By the way, if we made too many points, you can select one and just press the delete key to remove it. I'll press Command Z to add that one back in. And if you have all of your points selected by pressing Command A, you can make this shape more rigid by dragging outward or drag inward to soften it. In order to see a zoomed out view, you can also just right-click and drag on a handle to affect all points with no selection of all of these being necessary. Let's go to the View menu, Zoom, and choose Zoom to Fit. Now it's up to us to decide how to track this shape. And that is all revealed to us here in the Essentials panel. Under Track Motion Options right now, it's going to try to track translation, scale, rotation, and skew. It's good to play your clip and just ignore the mask temporarily just to sort of see the motion. You can see that this clip shifts in position, it rotates a little bit, and its scale changes. Knowing this, let's move back to the point where we created the mask, turn off skew, and I'm going to start by tracking this backward. There was a little bit of a shift here with the mask, but the best part is about Mocha is it keeps this tracking and shape information separate, meaning that if I need to make an adjustment on a frame like this, let me zoom in again, and all these points are selected. I could adjust this. It's going to add a keyframe here. With my layer still selected, continue to make individual changes to this mask, but because Mocha doesn't keep keyframes on every single frame, it's interpolating the information between this frame and this frame. And while there's still adjustments to be made because that's a dramatic shift, it allows us to keyframe or have to make adjustments to our mask a lot less and a lot more efficiently. So that's looking pretty good for the first bit of the track. I am now going to press Shift 8 to fit my image to the frame and then choose to track forward, and everything else looks good with the right eye. So let's label that in the Layers tab. I'll call this right eye. And because I'm going to be now tracking another, I'm going to lock this and also turn off the cogwheel here. I'm going to start to now make the mask here on the last frame for the left eye, but this time I'm going to select the magnetic layer. I'll zoom in once again on the image using the hand tool just to frame that by holding down the X key. And this is following the edges/contour of the eye as we double click to close this shape. Any other additions, I'll select these individual points to fine tune this, followed by pressing Command A to select all the points and just dragging in to soften this shape a little bit. All right, now that this is all set up, Shift 8 to fit. In the Essentials panel, I'll just make sure I'm tracking translation, scale, and rotation. And now I'll press the Track Backward button, paying attention to the eye and that big shift there towards the end that I knew threw off the track. So I'll move the playhead kind of just to right before where it happens. That's the shift. And with this layer still selected, we can now fine tune these individual points on this frame. Again, a keyframe is created there. You can see in the timeline. And because keyframes aren't created on every single frame and this information is separate, we've got this lovely interpolation between the first point that we created and the last. Any additional changes, just go through there and make some changes to the points. There's not too many here with the eye. So this is looking much better there with the left eye. I'll press Shift 8 to zoom out. Let's now label it accordingly, left eye. And I'll start to make some just changes to the outlines of both of my eyes here. Let me just turn on the cogwheel for the other eye so we can see it and unlock that layer.
Just keep in mind that the cog is only necessary when you're doing tracking. Once you are finished your tracking and you're happy with it, turn it off just to be safe.
We can actually change the color of both of these simultaneously by command clicking them and then pressing OK. We can see that the outlines update. And the other thing we can change is this little swatch here. This doesn't show to us by default after we've chosen it with the color picker. But if you press Option 1, this is going to show the matte, which is the area that we have indeed tracked. I see a reuse of this data in another effect. So I'm going to take one additional step before we go back to Premiere. I'm going to go to the File menu. I'm going to choose Export Project. I'm going to call this Face Track Eyes and save this to the desktop. Let's now click the red X icon on the top left portion of the interface and save this to head right back to Premiere Pro. So here in Premiere, we can see that we have the information is indeed carried over, but the black and white effect is now limited inside the eye. We want the exact opposite. So what we're going to do is under the pixel chooser properties, let's click the disclosure triangle to reveal those. We'll notice that if we reveal the mask section, the shape being referenced is Mocha spline. If we click the invert mask, now the black and white effect is everywhere but in the eyes. We're going to increase the feather so it's not so obvious the masking that we've done. If I press Control tilde just to do a full screen playback, we've got color there in his eyes and black and white everywhere else. Press Escape. Let's go to the effects panel again. And I'm actually going to do a search for Film Glow, which I'm going to apply to this clip, the BCC plus Film Glow, onto the shot. I'll head to Effect Controls, close out my black and white effect, and go into the Mocha mask of the Film Glow. Remember how we exported a project from when we were just using Mocha? Well, I'm going to open that project by going to the File menu, find the Face Track Eyes, choose Open, and now I've transferred that tracking information from one Continuum effect to another. Let's exit out of Mocha. Let's press Save and see that inside of Premiere, if I start to lower the threshold of the glow, we should start to see that it is affecting the pupils. Way too harsh. So let's go in to Pixel Chooser, into the mask, where the Mocha spline is being referenced. There's no need in this case to invert it because we want it to be applied to the eye. I can now adjust the intensity and even the color of the glow, let's say to something more aqua, to just be limited to the subject's eyes. The masking still needs some help, but hopefully this gives you an idea of what you can do with a Mocha masking workflow. Let's now move on to parameter-based tracking. So in your Video 6 exercises bin, let us go to the Mocha param tracking sequence. We're going to attach a lens flare over here to the sun. To do this, let's press Shift 7 again for effect controls and just type in the word lens flare. I'm going to apply BCC plus lens flare to the shot and let's go to effect controls. Let's go inside the effects editor and choose a preset that would mimic the sun. So new in Continuum 2024, if you do a search, you'll find a few examples here. I'll select Big Sun 2 first and settle on Big Sun 3. You may notice that your background has disappeared, but if we go to our parameters and change the view from flare to output, we'll be able to see it again. And now I'll just grab the on-screen controls here to position this lens flare in the middle of the shot, not to mention its pivot point down here. And once I apply, now that's back inside the host. Now, in order to track this, what I'm going to do is head to Mocha Track and click on the Mocha Parameter Track button. Okay, here inside of Mocha, we can see that we have the position of where we want our lens flare to be, and then also a position search area. So we can be a bit more generous with the search area in this instance to sort of try to get the texture of the sun. And since this entire background moves in a similar way, we could try to track a different region to be a bit more accurate if this didn't work out. If I just scrub this back, we can see that the sun movement is rather subtle. So I'm going to click on the word translation just to have that activated, and then click on track forward. We can right now see that it is tracking the position and search area. And now we come into a foreground object, which it keeps on holding onto this area because of the size of the texture. Now I'm going to close Mocha here at the top left-hand corner, and let's see what happens inside of the host. Okay, here back inside of the host, let's take a look at the Mocha parameter track properties by disclosing them and seeing that the parameter track is going to use the position set inside of Mocha. It's currently turned on. And if required, we can also have a position offset. So we could actually move the lens flare to another location here without affecting the original track. I'll just press Command Z to undo that. Let's just play this forward to see that the lens flare is actually now placed into the scene. Now in this specific shot, it might be helpful for us to actually hide the lens flare a bit. So one thing we can do is if you go down to the occlusion area, we could choose a source, such as video 1 in this instance. And if you want, we can actually view the occlusion map of our layer, or we could start to play with the threshold in order to determine where our lens flare shows up and where it doesn't. So specifically, this kind of foreground object is where we don't want it to show up. And if I now turn off the view to output, we can now see the lens flare still in the sky, but over areas that are darker because the channel is set to luminance, the lens flare is not as bright. Let's move on to yet another example where we can see corner pinning in action. One thing to note is that you do have corner pinning available in certain BCC Plus effects, although we will be taking a look at Corner Pin Studio in this example. Now for our final example, let's head to the Video 6 exercise files and open up the corner pin start sequence. You're going to find 2 tracks, one containing a sign that we're going to use to replace the existing sign on the double-decker bus. In order to do this, we have to use a very specific effect to handle the Mocha parameter tracking, which we'll find in our BCC match move section called BCC Corner Pin Studio. We can drag that on to the sign replacement. We could see 2 things when I select this effect by its name. One, an outer yellow outline, which represents the original shape. So if I turn this effect on and off, you can see that was the original scale of the sign. And this inner box is representing where we want to pin it to. It's very important that this yellow outline encompasses your entire sign and is not chopping off a portion of it and has the proper corners. Let's turn this effect back on and now use the crosshairs there with the Bow Church sign to align them to the wood green bus. So this is a good place we can get a rough idea here in this zoomed out view of where we want to corner pin this to. But just to perfect this, increase the size. I increased my size to 150%, where we could see the corners a bit better of where we essentially want to track it to. Now, in order to track this in Mocha, we need to do a couple steps. Not only do we want to send this replacement sign to Mocha, but the background image as well. At the very top of the effect under background layer, set that to video 1. And at the bottom of the effect, go to your Mocha Tracker Mocha parameters, twirl them down, and click on Mocha Motion Tracker. Here, we can see a folder. If we click the plus icon, the corner pins, so the blue outline representing essentially what we are tracking, the 4 points, and the outer box is the search area. In fact, I'm going to increase the search area to include that HV33 sign and not get as much of the edges of this bus. In addition, on your tools panel, we can turn on a grid to allow us to see if this shape has the same orientation of the existing sign. So we can use this to better align those corner pin edges. And don't forget that Z key to zoom in if you want to make sure that you have the exact points that you're looking for here when tracking the sign. Since there's only translation and scale movement in this shot, I'm going to turn off rotation. And first of all, let's track forward. And even though this sign goes off screen, Mocha seems to do a pretty good job keeping up with the corners. I'll then move back to the first keyframe and then start to track this backward. Now there are a few running reflections that could get in the way of this, as well as some lens flares that might interfere, but it seems like it kept up the track pretty well. Let me just play this to see. That corner pin seems to have maintained itself, although of those other interferences. But regardless, we could use Mocha to help us further if required. Let me click the X icon to go back into Premiere, and we can see, yep, that sign is still there, but now tracked to our scene. If I move my playhead to the beginning of this project and then press Control tilde, we can take a look at this sign. And while it is corner pinned nicely to the shot, it doesn't feel very integrated into the scene. This is where we want to start to maybe composite this inside and use some of the techniques that we learned in the last video. You'll see that Corner Pin Studio has a light wrap that we can take advantage of. We can turn it on. It looks at the background layer, and then we can decide a softness as well as a wrap width for how much we want it to potentially affect this image. If you go to your Video 6 exercise bin and open up the Corner Pin Complete,
let's first of all zoom out here in the program monitor. Just set this to fit inside our effect controls, and you can see all of the effects that have been added to this complete version. Just before the Corner Pin Studio effect, there was a Lumetri color effect to help balance the colors of the sign a bit better, followed by a light sweep on here as well, which adds an extension of the lens flare in the scene and can see is keyframed to follow those lights. In addition to this, we also have a blurring of the sign. I'll turn that off and on, followed by the match grain effect that we explored in an earlier movie. Keep in mind that you can use the light sweep effect. You can actually hop inside of this Bow Church sign. If we click on each of these individual layers, we could add that light sweep to these individual ones as well. And that takes us through how we can access Mocha directly inside of Continuum for Mocha masking, parameter tracking, not to mention corner pinning.